everyone. Welcome to today's Zip Chat from Accelerate. This is Jill Hurston from the marketing team. With that, I'm going to hand this over to our host, Mike Watson. He is our SVP of Sales. Mike, over to you.
Thanks, Jill, and welcome everyone to Zip Chat episode 22. It's been an interesting ride, like 2 years. We started this right after COVID. Went to the we're trying to do something different, and this is what we came up with. I've hosted most of these. It's been really fun, and I hope everyone has a good time listening to this one. As Jill said, I'm the SVP of Sales at Accelerate, and my background is in engineering management. So not only do I have this sales management kind of thing going on, but I also know a lot about engineering and technical details, including I was a developer and architect for a long time. So hopefully I can add some value to this as we go through it. We got two great experts here with me. We've got Sean Noonan. He's the Director of Solutions Consulting at Appian. Sean, thanks for joining us. And then also we have Richard Nolan, who's a Senior Appian Architect here at Accelerate. Welcome, Richard. I think this is your second journey on Zip Chats. All right, so today we're going to be talking about low code, no code, but specifically like how it compares to traditional development, right? So there's traditional development stacks like Java, PHP, LAMP stack, all these things. Then there's these low code, no code options, which have been around for a long time, but they've really matured a lot recently. So as we've sort of made major leaps in no code, low code, it'd be great to sort of really compare these things as they are today, not as they were 5 years ago or 10 years ago, which I think is a common fallacy. So with that, I'm just going to get into it. Let's bring in Sean from our panel, and I'll kick it off here. So one of the appeals of no code, low code is it seems like it has a low level of complexity in getting started. So compared to traditional stacks, do you think the complexity levels continue to stay low as you dive deeper into the project, or is it really just at the beginning it's low and then there's all sorts of complexities that come next?
No, I think I think it's low, and I think it continues to get lower as the products evolve. If you think about traditional development, you start with effectively a blank slate, and you got to figure out where to start and where to go, and you got to figure out sort of the way to take something forward. I think with low code, no code tools, more and more, you're seeing you have a starting point. You have guides, wizards. It's not just a blank canvas anymore. When you're building those first applications, you've got different approaches that you can take, that the tool can walk you through, that different tools can walk you through. You can come at these different types of applications from different approaches, depending on the use case, depending on your own comfort as a developer or designer. For example, Appian has different ways that it can walk you through creating an application. You can take a data-centric approach, and it'll walk you through a wizard where you start with your data design, or you can take a process-centric approach where you sort of start from that angle, or a persona or user experience-based approach where you start from your screens and work backwards. And I think that's part of the beauty in terms of building these things in, is that the tools actually help you get started. Moving forward, as you get started, we've got that lower barrier of entry. There's things that are inherent in the tool, like security, for example. As a low code developer or designer, I don't have to worry about SQL injection. I don't have to worry about encryption, right? Those things are just inherent to the tool itself. When I want to figure out how to do role-based access, I don't need to segment all the users. I can just hook into the existing identity management solution that I have within my enterprise. When you think about rolling out your application across different form factors, one of the worst things for developers is thinking about, just last week, they finally retired Internet Explorer. How many developers have been through a scenario where you test everything out and you open it up in Internet Explorer and something's a little off, right? With low code, no code platforms, you don't have to think about those things. Those are tested by us, the vendor, ahead of time, so that they'll render across those things the way that you'd expect. Mobile comes through as well. You don't have to have a separate design for mobile. That's going to be built in, and you can use those applications natively through applications on your mobile devices without having to account for that. It just, the design itself is responsive and can react to how it's being rendered and where it's being rendered. Those are all things that developers traditionally have had to worry about and maintain over time that just aren't things they need to think about when it comes to low-code, no-code platforms.
Yeah, that point about Internet Explorer is good. I mean, I'm sure many of us development leaders have pulled a lot of hair out over IE6 in particular as we've moved past it. That was quite the challenge for a long time, so we're happy to see it gone.
That's right.
Awesome. So that's good stuff. So Richard, just to pull you into this conversation, let's dive a little deeper on this, and at a technical level, what are the elements, as an architect that you enjoy about this, and what is it about low code that, or no code, low code, that simplifies your life and your developer's life?
Yeah, Sean made some great points about it, and I think at another level, it's important to realize that it's very rare for you to have to climb outside of the ecosystem that you're developing in your no-code, low-code platforms to build special tools for things like integrations or data persistence. All of that is inherent in the platform, and it really is a significant lift when you're working on customer projects embedded in a customer environment where the business processes may lead to extending outside of the core tool that you're working with. All of those abilities to just work within the platform and the tool set within the platform to gather that information from federated data sources makes it very simple, incredibly simple. In fact, over the years, it's been the biggest advantage from my perspective is the palette of tools that are offered to you to ease that development in a business problem. Another critical component, I think, that has been really underlauded in other presentations I've seen is the solidity of data persistence. So Appian in particular makes it very easy to, as Sean mentioned, build your data design around your data. But even if you're crafting a new data model to support an application, whether it's net new or you're extending an application in an environment, the tools are very straightforward to use. They're very effective, even in deeply complex relationships. And in particular, the Hibernate models and Appian's data synchronization model make it incredibly easy to build really complex views of your data with just a few mouse clicks. And that really speeds the process. It doesn't absolve you of the need of an overview of data architecture, but from an implementation and a coding perspective, it's very easy.
Richard, I think it can also be helpful when you actually have those visual representations of the data and the relationships that you can then go back and match against your data design to make sure that you're on that right track that you had been planning.
Yeah, exactly. The tools have matured to the point where it's become so simple to do that. I no longer find it such a committee effort to do the data design. It's something that someone at a lead developer position or a senior developer position can handle very easily. And even our juniors are doing a great job of it right now. We just kind of take a supervisory role on it. I think another important, oh, sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I wanted to drill in a little bit there because I believe Appian has a strategy where you can use your own database very easily. I mean, part of what you're saying is that you have your own existing database, you point Appian to it, and it discovers it and then allows you to model on top of it. I just want to make sure it's clear that that's what's happening, and it's not like you have to do a separate modeling effort outside of your existing database and then somehow map that together.
No, you're exactly right, Mike. If you're using an existing database to build an application on top of, Appian will quite happily model the data structures in that database and give you easy access to adding data to those data tables, reading data from those data tables. And then if you choose to extend, or if the business is driving you to extend on top of that, it's a very simple effort to craft new data objects, whether they're tables or views or things like that from the Appian modeler. So it's it is really a beautiful tool to work with.
Yeah,
And
great.
I think a little further, if I may, there's another important factor that when I was developing in Java and C and C++, and Lord help me, COBOL, one of the things that you had to work on was scalability, and that's a tool that that every developer who's trying to figure out what the load is going to be like on the application, whether they're being performative in their code base, whether they're delivering really robust and speedy interfaces to the users, it's a part of every developer's life in a full stack platform. With Appian, it's inherent in the platform that you're working on that it's scalable, especially in the cloud offerings, although on-prem is available for Appian. But further than that, every object that you build within Appian, whether it's an expression rule or a sale interface or your records, gives you a performance analysis on how it's behaving as you're developing it. So you have your eye on the prize right from the get-go, from the very first moment you start crafting code in the platform. And when I say crafting code, I want to be careful that you're using the design tools that are in Appian. There are opportunities for you to write low-level code in Appian, but most of my day is spent in a designer interface that's very, very easy to use a mouse and drag and drop objects to with minimal configuration. Even in those, you have a very solid view of the scalability factors that you're going to face when you deploy the application.
Yeah, great. So one of the things that's interesting to me is like no code, low code typically is like the first step if you want to do a prototype. It's like, oh, let's log into a no code, low code platform and let's like quickly get a rapid prototype going. And then it's sort of ignored maybe beyond that or not considered valid as a solution, right? I mean, that's one path. And the other path is a lot of times developers push to like throw that code away and let's start fresh with a whole new thing. So is that something that no code, low code really requires? I mean, do you have that same mentality when you're doing a prototype in no code, low code and then moving to like sort of a full implementation? Sean, what do you think about that?
I mean, I think there's a spectrum of answers there in terms of like where different organizations are going to lie, and I think it depends on the use case. I think the beauty of a low code, no code platform is you get to make decisions like that. What do you want to keep? What's good? What's okay that you want to iterate on and build on, and what's not so helpful and you want to get rid of. Traditionally, most software design is this sort of monolithic thing. So when you build a POC, it's this monolithic thing and you have to decide if you like it or not. And normally it's like, okay, I got the idea, but I don't want to deal with that. I'll start over, right? Mm-hmm. Rather than having a complex monolithic inheritance model like you'd have with traditional development and some of the platforms out there, Appian has a model by which you compose different components, and you can sort of swap things in and out as you need. So you don't necessarily have to start at the bottom and build up, and then decide how far you want. You can sort of swap in and out components and say, I like this, I want to keep it, I want to pull this out, I don't like it. So you can sort of make those decisions about what to keep, what's useful, and what to start over on, what to scrap, sort of on a much more granular basis than you would be able to. So not only can you do those proofs faster and show something very, very quickly, but you don't have to throw it away if you don't want to, and you can pick and choose what makes sense to do so.
Mm-hmm. So what you're saying is that there's tiny pieces of the implementation, like say the model or the UI or like elements within those things, the components, and you can iterate over them or throw them away and start over, but you don't have to do like all or nothing. It's could be pieces.
Exactly right. I mean, you think about things like business rules, right? Who's gonna understand what the business rules should be? The business or a developer with an IT, right? The business is going to understand the business rule, and they'll build those, and those are things you might want to keep. Now, business user might, as they're doing a POC or a proof point, like they might model a mock integration and say, all right, this is what it might look like. This is the type of data that I need. But when we do this for real, maybe we'll throw that away and do something more robust. So you can make those choices and sort of take advantage of the expertise of the whoever's doing that part of the development and keep those things that make sense.
I'd like to add, though, one of the things that I find incredibly useful that has evolved as part of the maturity of the tools are the patterns that come in the box right in the design interface. So whether it's POC or it's post POC production, you find yourself following some very common patterns when you're deploying these types of applications. And in Appian's particular case, they've done a great job of codifying those into wizards and design components that you can just drag and drop onto a screen, and they're pre-built. And I have found that whether we transition from, a POC initial engagement or right to coding development, those same patterns find really fruitful use. And I seldom throw them away out of a POC. I might modify them or extend them slightly, but it's very rare for us to throw work away in a POC. And I do think that is endemic to working with these no-code, low-code platforms, that they lend themselves to reusability.
Yeah, that's really insightful, Richard. Thanks for throwing that in there. I wouldn't have guessed that there was that little throwaway, right? Like it's just innate. But I come from an old school, traditional background, so like, I've never really actually worked with no code, low code in any serious way. So that's really interesting. All right, so let's move on a little bit. Jill, is there any questions from the audience?
I do have one. Let me see. Jay was asking, are there any no-code options that you would avoid?
I can take that one, Joe, or at least start. I mean, I think the applicability of low code or no code has much more to do with the use case than anything else. There's certain types of use cases that lend themselves really well to low code and no code platforms, and within that, there's certain platforms within that space that handle certain cases better than others. I think in a past Zip chat, somebody brought up the idea, like, you probably wouldn't build a video game in a no-code, low-code platform. Like, that's probably not the right use case for this type of technology. Business applications, where you're collecting information, passing information around, integrating with different systems, these are much better fits for that type of tool. And I mentioned different platforms have different strengths. Low code, no code as a concept has been around for a long time, right? We've had HTML designers, web page designers are generating HTML in the background. Those have been around for 25, 30 years. If all you want to do is put some UIs in front of a database, well, Microsoft Access has been doing that for that same 25, 30 years. So like, these concepts aren't new. What's new is what's evolving is the complexity that these different types of no-code, low-code tools can handle. Appian in particular has come from the workflow space. So when you're talking about orchestrating an end-to-end workflow across different parts of your organization, different people, bots, different systems of data, where you want to layer in business rules and decisioning, and have all the monitoring tooling, like those are the great types of fit for Appian. If all you want to do is create some dashboards on top of some data, there's other tools that might be a better fit for a lower end use case like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't realize that about Appian, that your background is in workflow. Like, I did a lot of workflow development in my day, so something near and dear to my heart. And actually, I've seen the Appian workflow tool, sort of the component that is the builder for that and modeler, and it looks pretty awesome from my, But the other point I was just reminiscing about is we used to call these 4G tools, right? Fourth generation coding. I don't know, Richard, you probably remember those days. So yeah, they have been around for a long time, with different names, obviously. Okay, so let's dive into a slightly different direction. So let's talk a little bit about process and how process varies between no code, low code, and traditional. Basically what I've seen is it looks the same, right? Like you're still doing agile, you're still doing sprints, you're like whatever your process you want to have, in particular agile seems to be, fits right in. So what are your thoughts there, Sean?
Yeah, I think the tools, the low code, no code tools really align perfectly with agile. Agile is about, simplicity of the process, and the tools support that. When you're iterating, especially with a low code, no code tool, you can build something useful in each iteration. Because you're able to turn these things around faster, at the end of each sprint, for example, you have something that is actually useful, and then you can, go on and do your next sprint. You're never stuck in a state where your whole app is broken. You're building, you just keep building on top of usable working parts. You never get to that point where like, all right, I'm going to put something really risky in, and that's going to break the whole app for 2 weeks, so don't use it. Like, that's just not part of the agile development process, nor is that something that you end up with when you're building in a low code, no code tool. And I guess if you're doing a daily stand-up, for example, as part of an agile development sprint, like what better way to show progress than, hey, here's the difference from what I had yesterday to today. Like you can actually make progress and have something, be able to show, usable, helpful iterations daily.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, actually, when you bring it, you bring that together, like agile plus no code, low code, it seems like you're much more likely to succeed in a sprint and not having as much overflow. Like testing can be done really easily within that window. And so it would probably eliminate a lot of the challenges that traditional development has in short sprint windows, right? So I don't know if you're necessarily getting more, but you probably are for this, in the same time frame. The other thing that sort of tweaked my interest in that answer is you're really not building frameworks. Like that's what usually trips you up when it creates those delays of like, oh, this code's going to be broken for 2, 4, 6 weeks because we have to put a role-based system in place, right? I mean, that's just sort of inherently in the code. And so it's really just turning it on and tweaking it. It's not a massive uplift. So that is an interesting point.
If we look at it from a broader perspective too, we've actually helped lead organizations from waterfall to agile using these no-code platforms, because sometimes you have a conservative organization and it's a hard sell not to do a deep dive into the full view of everything and build all your requirements up front. But if you can go through a short proof of concept sprint where you have demonstrations 2 or 3 times a week showing how fast things are progressing, it tends to loosen the reins on waterfall. We've used that with a number of organizations to help them switch to agile.
And building on some of the points we made earlier, Richard, you talked about performance issues and being able to diagnose those. With a traditional waterfall approach, you wouldn't know about the performance issues till you got to the end. You get to the end, you deploy it, you test it out, and you say, oh, this is slow. Let me go figure out where that is. With a no-code, low-code tool like Appian, where you've got performance views built into the designers themselves, and you can do that performance testing and the unit testing as you're designing those objects, like these things come to light much faster, and you can fix them along the way rather than having to get all the way out, deploy it, then figure out where to go. It's much easier to spot, it's much easier to diagnose, it's much easier to fix these issues. The other thing that I would say is, it's related to the POC thing. You don't have to write pages and pages of documentation to start a project. Agile certainly doesn't want you to do that. When you're building with a no-code, low-code tool, you just build, right? You just go. The system just documents itself as well. Appian has some built-in documentation features where, rather than having to write documentation saying this is what my product or this is what my application is doing, Appian can in real time generate that documentation for you. That's something I don't know any developer that enjoys documenting, what they just wrote. So taking that out of the equation Auditability is another thing. You don't have to, Richard talked about just turning on certain parts of the platform. You don't, there's no tooling saying, or you don't have to implement some tooling saying, all right, I want to audit this. It just happens. It's just there. You can then choose what you want to do with that information, if anything. Do you want to display it? Do you want to create alerts? Those are, you choose the way that you might want to use that information, but you don't have to do anything for that information to exist. It's just inherent in the platform itself. And I think that aligns well with Agile.
Yeah, that's interesting. Jill, do we have another question from the audience?
I do. Mike Martin has a question. Martin, I've unmuted you. Do you want to ask your question, please? I know Martin is on a mobile, so he might have some issues, but I'll go ahead and ask it. So he was saying in a worst case scenario, would the update doesn't work? Would it be that the update doesn't work?
Yeah, so what happens when you upgrade Appian or a no-code, low-code platform? What happens if it isn't working, right? Something didn't get caught in the upgrade path or something. I think that's a reasonable, most CTO type people are going to wonder that kind of thing, right? What are my risks really?
Yeah, I think part of the appeal is that Appian does, or any of these platforms do a lot of that work for you, rather than you having to regression test your own applications every single release. The vendors do that for you as part of their own release cycle. Now, obviously, that goes so far. You're going to want to, many organizations are going to want to sort of double check, triple check. One of the things that's built into the tool is versioning. And the ability to roll things back. So that's another very helpful way to help manage that risk, is to know, well, if something happens, something didn't get caught, and something gets deployed that isn't working the way it should, and it used to be working, you can use that versioning to roll different objects back to, the state that they were working the way you'd expect.
Yeah, when I think about this, Sean, and Richard, I'm interested in your opinion as well, is this isn't any more risk than if you were taking your normal software project and releasing it, right? I mean, there's always a chance something can go wrong, and you might have to tune or tweak something in the moment to get it working. I just don't see it as any worse. Possibly it's better, right? But certainly not any worse. Thoughts on that?
I can think of at least one place it's certainly better, and that is that in a traditional code stack environment, your users are certainly responsible for managing the repository and managing the versioning. So whether it's the lead or the architect on the team, or every individual developer at a free-for-all, Appian's doing this automatically under the hood for you. So the ability for someone to make a mistake, have that propagate over a period of time, and then find yourself in a situation where you're looking for a needle in a haystack to go back to the version that works, and only to find that it may not even be there. Appian's got you covered with that from that perspective. It's all automatic. Furthermore, when it comes to Appian's quarterly releases, I've been working with it for about 15 years now, not in isolation, but predominantly. And we've never received a showstopper update in 15 years. So, the product's really robust. The product management team behind it at Appian itself is fantastic at doing a job of QA. And then our own best practices around how we manage our code in preparation for upcoming versions, because Appian's great about telling us what's coming. We manage all that risk very carefully. And I've never encountered a situation where it's been a complexity. So it really speaks to no code, low code, in that even the parts that you really kind of warrant eyes on are very simple to do.
I think one of the reasons for that, Richard, because I've experienced this, this probably comes as no surprise, but Appian runs our business on Appian. And our first beta customer for every single release is Appian. We roll out these versions of our software in the months prior to GA on our own system. So we're running and operating our own business on this technology. in a real, production setting. We're running our business that way. And from time to time, there is a bug that will sneak through, but we'll find it before it's generally released to the rest of our customer base. So, I mean, that's just another big safeguard that we have in place to try to prevent against those things. Is we're testing it in real world scenarios. We're running our business on this stuff.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting, and good to know. Like that would certainly give me more confidence. I mean, Richard's 15 years and never seen it. I mean, that's amazing. That's a pretty good track record. So you must be doing something right over there in the Appian world. All right, so this actually dovetails into the next topic pretty well, is DevOps, right? So DevOps right now is super hot in the traditional world. Like everyone has now realized that this is like a key to going fast and quality and all the things. It also seems like it's really, I mean, part of it is people realize it's an important part of a good agile process, right? So how does DevOps work in a no-code, low-code tool? I mean, it seems to me it would just be built in, but talk a little bit more about that. How does that work?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that, if I may. The first thing that I mentioned is that you're really building in an ecosystem. You're not working in an editor with a bunch of code that then you add to a package and do a deployment on. It's all inherent in the environment. So it's very easy to do comparisons and deploys across your various environments. And so you can set up a package for deployment and then also add a governance layer on it that means that somebody has to actually approve it to be released into the next environment, which goes to carefully crafted maintenance windows, but you don't have to have developers sitting in those maintenance windows. And it's really easy to regulate that whole process. So it absolutely lends itself to a good DevOps model in the platform as we see it today. And I think it's only going to get better as broader organizational integrations happen. So where other tools start federating and Appian starts federating those other tools, you're going to wind up with a much more consolidated DevOps platform. And I know I'm prognosticating a little bit, but I have faith in it because like I said, I've been aware of how this has evolved over a long period of time. It really is a very simple thing to do. And in fact, we have offloaded moving things from our development environments to our test environments to resources that in past I never would have offloaded it to. It's that straightforward. So even our most junior resources are managing moving from dev to our test environments, and they're crafting great packages. So it's really straightforward.
And so I'm guessing nobody has to log into Git or any, whatever the choice of tool is there for source code control. That's somehow managed behind the scenes, and another thing that's just abstracted away from your need to worry about. That's my guess.
Yeah.
So it sounds to me like I'm, just thinking about this from a CTO kind of perspective, that built into the license cost, you get free DevOps, and you get free source control management, you get free security. So you're getting a lot actually for that license. That's interesting, right? Because I think that's actually probably an objection there. I'm not an expert here on selling Appian products or any no-code, low-code for that matter, but I would think that like, what am I getting for that license is like the big thing, right? So interesting. I don't want to drill into that point. I'm just just raising awareness that there is sort of this balance between what you have to pay for in your staff versus what you're actually paying for the tool itself. Moving on, so as we were preparing for this, there really seems to be a big key differential is mindset, right? Like how you actually go about coding. I've been a tech leader for a long time, as I've mentioned, and it seems like this is like the ultimate evolution of serverless, right? So you get serverless compute in databases, but then you go next step and it's like all of it's kind of just happening and you don't have to worry about any of the details underneath, including DevOps and all that. So is that how you look at it, Sean? Or I mean, do you have a different take on that? What are your thoughts?
No, I do. I do agree. I think it helps create new ways for people to communicate around these types of things, which helps facilitate a communication like so that it isn't so much of a leap. You know, traditional development, I've talked to you, write pages and pages of documentation, or the business tries to verbally communicate to the development team what it is they want, and they'll lock themselves in a room with whiteboards and draw things out, or there's lots of different ways these types of things have come together historically. With a low-code, no-code tool, you can just start going. You build it yourself. You collaborate on top of something that's real or looks real or looks along the lines of what it is that you actually want to ultimately end up with. A picture can be worth 1,000 words. Literally, it can save you thousands and thousands of words. Instead of me trying to describe, here's what I want, here's what I need to be able to do up over on this part of the screen. I want to, have a list of these things over here. I want to have the ability to capture this information. I want a button that does this. Well, that was, how many words was that? That's a hours-long conversation that I can eliminate with an actual picture. Like, actually, let me just show you what it is that I want. And I think that shift in mindset can really exponentially accelerate that development cycle.
Yeah, that makes sense. In fact, I've, talking to, Richard or one of his team members on a project, and that was one of the things they said is like, oh, instead of us talking about it, why don't I just build it right in front of you and show you, is that what you were talking about? Like, is this what you want? And just did it really quickly in real time, which is, very difficult in most other tooling. I mean, I think there's some, maybe Figma-like tools or whatever that, can do that, but it's not real. It's not as real, right? Like you're actually dummying it up. So it's very interesting. Yeah. So instead of talking a lot, you're saying just do, which
That's right.
Also an agile, lean kind of concept, right?
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. So is there anything else more at the technical, tactical level, Richard, where this mindset is really important? Like this mindset change versus traditional development?
Yeah, I think in a couple of ways. The first and foremost that occurs to me is that the tool set lays out some very viable paths for you. And when you follow those run books, whether it's as Sean mentioned earlier, you can take a process-based perspective to do the development, you can take a data-based perspective to do the development, or your human interaction. Following those paths really reduces the friction that pushes against you when you're doing development. And the second thing that I think is really important when I extend what you were both talking about with the show and the picture is worth 1,000 words, one of the things that we have experienced quite frequently is we have our business community building their requirements and their documentation in tools like Word and Visio, and then having extensive meetings with us to discuss them. And what we've started to do more and more frequently is draw those business analysts right into Appian with the interface designer to say, hey, wireframe up your screens for us, and into the process modeler to say, please just do your process maps out here, because we can really easy capture them at the next phase and turn those into working products. What we have found subsequently is that we have people in our business community who are getting itchy fingers to do development. They see how things glue together, and they are starting to see the pieces behind the scenes. We work very closely with them. And what it means is over the life cycle of a project, we're really accelerating. We're not working at a steady state because we're getting our team who are feeding us the requirements to do it faster and more in the mindset of the tool that we're working with. As a result, our customers are really surprised at the number of points that we aggregate sprint over sprint over sprint. And when I tell them early in the sprint cycle, that's probably too little for us, they're really shocked. But then, you know, over several sprints, they see that we still are accelerating. It really is a product of following those paths. And the last point I want to make on this is that it is very frequent for us to do a demonstration that is tightly bound to a set of requirements, only to have people kind of scratch their heads and say, you know what, that's what we asked for, but we're wondering if we could do this. And it's quite frequent for one of the developers to make that change behind the scenes in the demonstration, so that on the next screen refresh, they see what they've just asked for.
Wow, that's pretty
And
powerful.
it's made our user community really excited about the tool, because they see that fast progress. So that's the thing that I would
Yeah, I remember hearing in a client review, I think this relates to your point, that we were going to add a developer to a team, and the client got into a panic because they're like, there's no way we could feed that developer enough requirements. You know, it was probably the right thing to do, but I mean, there is that kind of chaos, right? Like, it puts a lot of emphasis on the front end and the business team to be ready to have requirements. It's just, you know, typically in traditional model, and, you know, the pain point is the opposite, right? Like, there's no point in doing anything on the product management side because it's going to take so long to get the backlog that we have done, right? So that's really an interesting transition.
I think I'll also say, like, comparing it to traditional development, like, traditional development goes fastest when you get all of the requirements right the first time. I would argue that with a low-code, no-code platform and Agile, development's fastest when you actually get things wrong along the way and put them in front of the business and they say, no, hold on, do this other thing. And you can respond and react quickly. Like, I would argue that's actually the faster way to develop, and it's the faster way to get to the ultimate end goal, is having a little bit of that. You know what? You're on the right track, sort of, but maybe just redirect here a little bit. Like, that's like the really insightful stuff that happens in these development cycles that just didn't work the same way traditionally.
Yeah, where I see that. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that the thing that neither of us said there is the end result is a better product. The end application that you deliver following these tools and the correct methodology actually meets the business needs better than what they may have documented as their desires. And it really is very demonstrable in all the projects that I've worked on, that when we course correct, the users are enthusiastic, but they also see a significant lift in value over what we're working on. So
yeah, what I was going to interject there is what you're really talking about is that you're making it so that product management doesn't have to be as perfect, which means they're faster, right? And that ultimately makes your whole project faster, because you know, one of the things that I coach teams about Agile or just process in general is that you can't just locally optimize your function, right? You have to think about how it maps against all the functions, right? If the developers had the perfect process, but it like makes product management really slow, like this traditional waterfall in theory, it doesn't make for the best and quickest outcome. So, you know, understanding that like there's this broader umbrella and how you can make other people faster by doing things in a different way is very powerful. So that's good to hear that. I mean, that kind of thing happens, and that's normal. So moving on to another aspect, so that's kind of our last topic as we wrap up here. So hiring has been tough. Finding the right resources for the role, regardless of whether it's development or any role, I think has been just kind of a challenge for everybody. It feels like the things that you've said so far make it easier to hire a developer, right? You don't need very specific skills. You just have to have the right mindset. Is that true? And if it is true, what is the actual selection criteria for a developer that isn't like, do you know Java and this framework really well?
I think the biggest thing is having a process mindset, thinking through sort of procedurally how an application should function, what type of information you need to capture, how information might flow from step to step, and person to person, sort of thinking about how things happen and being able to sort of build that map in your head. That's the skill I think that it really takes to develop in these low code, no code applications. You mentioned this idea of hiring a developer, and that is certainly the case in a lot of places. A lot of organizations that we work with don't hire developers. They'll take existing talent that might be working on something else, business analyst or something, and they will train them to be a developer. So it gives you another avenue to source talent from, not just necessarily going out on the street and hiring somebody with these skills, but these skills are easy enough to build and develop and cultivate within your own organization with people that have that proper mindset.
Yeah, that makes sense. Richard, are you seeing the same thing? In fact, you alluded to earlier that business folks are anxious to get a hold of the tool and try it for themselves. And that seems to walk right into that same answer that Sean was talking about.
Absolutely. There's two other things that I'd add to it. And one is that there's a dearth of broad generalists in IT today. It's very hard to be one. So picking someone who is from a developer stream and converting them to become an Appian designer is certainly a viable option. Someone with solid development skills, an ability to understand deep logic and how to turn business requirements into a viable application, massively useful skills. But people who are on support roles in the organization, like what Sean mentioned, but particularly for me, I find people with database backgrounds and database architecture skills are a huge add to the Appian development pool, because it's very easy to teach them the tool, but they have a discipline associated with some of the more complex data architecture that lends itself to dealing with federated data. And that's because it's easy with Appian, it's a real lift. You get a better product. The second area that I find really interesting is I'm finding in my customer environments a lot of more senior folks who have worked in things like Java and C and C++ and all of the languages that we've evolved through over the years really enjoy Appian and accelerate very rapidly to huge output, high volume output developers, because that broad experience means that they can really take advantage of the speed of the tool and deliver really rich feature sets. So there's things that you may not come to as a first choice candidate as a developer that you may be quite surprised do really well with the tool. And those two are just common examples that I encounter. But there's many more. And I liked what Sean said, that it's really more about mindset. Someone who kind of approaches this from a broad thinking perspective is probably going to do well with the tool.
Yeah, so I think unpacking that, so I think people that don't have any development experience can be successful, which is great. So that opens up a lot of experience, but also you're saying people that have a lot of development experience, but maybe not with this kind of tool, can also be really successful, right? So you don't have to find that Ruby on Rails expert or, like some, Groovy or like whatever those, there's some platforms out there that are just really specific and hard to source, but here it's sort of just give me a good developer regardless of what their background is, and we can make them a great developer in Appian. That's what it sounds like to me. So that's pretty helpful. Jill, is there another question?
I did, real quick. This is
Jill's talking in my ear, so I'm just trying to.
Sorry. We can just ask it again real quick. Is it possible to build a great user interface combining all of the apps needed and still be in compliance with medical international standards using low or no code?
So a couple of things in there, right? So there's the HIPAA medical standards kind of thing, or could be HIPAA, could be another governing body there. And then the other is, can you combine a bunch of things and make a great app? I think those are the two things that are in there. Sean, you want to take a whack at that one?
Yeah, sure. I think the answer to both of them is yes. They're sort of separate questions that I treat differently. When it comes to certifications, healthcare in particular, high trust, HIPAA, those are actually more about data segmentation and encryption and sort of things on the back end that are inherent to the way Appian runs their cloud operations. So you'll inherit those, you use Appian, you inherit those certifications because we manage the back end of Appian for you in that way. There's a number of other certifications across other industries, with FedRAMP, PCI DSS, FISMA, you name it, there's lots of them out there. Those actually, more than anything, have a lot more to do with sort of how you store data, how different components communicate with one another, encryption, those types of things. No, I mean, I probably should have said this earlier. Those are all things you don't have to worry about. Appian does those things for you. The tool does them for you. Now, in terms of building an application, almost as an umbrella application, if you will, I mentioned Appian runs our business on Appian. I don't know how many applications we have on Appian. We have hundreds of them. If you were to think about them from an application development perspective, as an employee, when you think of it, we have one application. We have that sort of landing page type application where everything comes together. You might be hitting different backends and different processes behind the scene, but it's all consolidated into one landing page off of which there's navigation paths that are smooth and easy to understand to each of the different sort of, call them functional applications that sort of sit underneath that umbrella.
Yeah, so you're doing this sort of aggregated big app, and you know, I'm guessing you like the experience. You didn't exactly say if you enjoy it or not, but I'm guessing that's true. So, and my take on this, and Richard, I'd love you to back me up or question my judgment here, but this is like the perfect use case, right? So you have all these disparate systems and you need to pull together some common view of what's going on there. Like, that's difficult to do. There's a lot of integration points. There's a lot going on. And it seems like the framework, no-code, low-code framework that handles integration really well would be just like a perfect fit for that. What do you think, Richard?
No, I'd absolutely back you up on that. I'll go further even and say that that you know, our primary customer base for where we're deploying Appian right now is in the insurance space, where there is actually medical information being exchanged with things like MIB, other insurers, and so that's a use case that we deal with every day. But further, if I go a little further into my past, one of the applications that I built, and I have to be a little circumspect about it, but was to do with law enforcement using this tool, using Appian, to submit search and seizure requirements to one of our customers. And really what happened in that situation was we leveraged the underlying Oracle fully encapsulated and encrypted database, but the Appian tool set itself met all of the requirements for everything sitting on top of that Oracle database. So the Appian group structure, its security model, all of the certifications that it had were examined very thoroughly by both sides of the application. And you know, it was really effortless to build the application because I didn't have to worry about all those things and where I might slip and let something leak. And it's solid in the framework. So yeah, it's quite common to use it, and I think it's a no-brainer that this is an approach you can take.
Yeah, I would assume that the low-code, no-code platforms like Appian, for instance, would have like penetration testing and all of these things necessary to get the certification, and you sort of inherit it as a third party. And I'm sure you can get access to it and show whoever you need to that this is, you know, fully compliant with some of these things.
Yep, that's right.
That's great. I mean, going back to your point about security, like, it's a huge deal, right? And like not having to worry about SQL injection and some of the other, you know, OWASP things, you know, that's just kind of built in for free. And like even the testing, right? Like that's, I didn't even think about that until just, we were just talking about it. Like, I'm sure you get a lot of that for free too, right? You don't have to have your own third party auditing tool to go figure out whether, you know, the uptime is right or like whatever those requirements are. So that's pretty awesome. All right, so we're at the end of the Zip Chat. We put up our contact information. Feel free to reach out to us. I mean, if you have further questions, you're interested in having coffee and talking about this in deeper detail, I'm guessing all three of us would be happy. I mean, I'm speaking for the other two, but we'd be happy to talk about our experience, you know, what we like about it, what we don't like about it, you know, things that are improving over time in the industry, right? Because I think that's that's always happening, right? Like we're moving forward. You know, I see it specifically with Appian, who we're close to, but I'm sure all the platforms are moving quickly to solve some of the key problems, make it even easier, right? The wizards that Richard was talking about earlier, making those even easier, right? So, like I say, feel free to reach out. These are topics we're passionate about, and we'd love to talk to you about it.
Mike, I just have a real quick question that's probably a yes or no answer, I hope. But is Appian also in compliance with European standards? Or does that require a further conversation?
We are. We're a global
Okay.
organization. We follow security practices and certifications and compliance protocols around the globe. If you did want more information, you can check out trust.appian.com where all these things are enumerated.
Trust.appian.com. Yeah, that's
Right.
great. Okay, so we're wrapping up here. I want to thank Richard and Sean, especially for joining me on this, you know, taking time out of your life to come on here and talk about this. I know both of you are very passionate about it. So it's been very helpful and insightful for me. Even above and beyond what we talked about in the prep, I learned even more during this session. So that's amazing. Also, the audience, I want to thank you for joining. As I always say on these things, if it wasn't for the audience, we wouldn't be doing this. So thank you for attending and showing your interest. And like I say, feel free to reach out and continue the conversation. Bye for now. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.